Yo, what's going on? Hivers. 90s Friday post for Friday. I believe it's the 6th tomorrow. What a crazy afternoon. I'm recording this Thursday evening. It's about 6 p.m. I like to do it a little early so I'm not rushing it together on Friday mornings. I usually post for Thursday night, but I'll probably wait. I'm a little discombobulated because I did an extra silver post today, so I'll probably post this in the morning. But this week for 90s Friday / 5-Tune Friday, I wanted to pick tunes from the Seattle area from the early 90s that were bands that were hot in that scene, and some bands did get some minor radio play, some minor MTV play. But these are the bands that were friends with bands like Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Pearl Jam. But these bands, most of them did get the major label deal. But they did not get the same success. Including one of the bands was a band everybody thought was going to be the band to make it first. And ironically, they were not one of the big four that made it out of there. It is what it is. What are you going to do? First up, Screaming Trees, a band that did have some minor play on alternative rock radio. We're going to do a song from their 1992 album, which was on a major label. Again, once Nirvana broke, and even before that, because Soundgarden got signed in 1989, maybe late 88, because their album came out on A&M Records in 89. Alice in Chains obviously came out in 1990. Mother Love Bone was signed, who's going to be our second pick. But that's unfortunately different circumstances. Andrew Wood, the lead singer, died of a drug overdose in 1990. They were the band that was expected to be, huge. And then all the guys in the band did start Pearl Jam. So, you could say it's the same band with a different lead singer. Obviously, they changed the name. Andrew Wood. And again, I'm actually going to go through and listen again. But for Screaming Trees, for the first pick, I am going to do the song Nearly Lost You, which was their biggest hit. Again, compared to Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Pearl Jam. Very minor play on MTV, very minor alternative rock radio success. But they did have some. So yeah. And then pick number 2, Mother Love Bone. I'm going to go with the song Crown of Thorns. Again, they probably would have made it pretty big. They did have a major label deal. One album did come out on Island Def Jam. I believe it was finished before Andrew passed away. If not, it was put together and released later. I'm not 100% sure. I'll actually look into that and put a note below. But Andrew Wood, man, he was in like 4 bands from like 84 to 89, and then Mother Love Bone was the one that, got the big deal. But for bonus jam later, I'll put in another band he was in. He was like the grunge David Lee Roth. And a lot of people think if he didn't pass away, he would have been the bridge to like rock and roll and grunge. Like a lot of people think he would have been kind of the bridge between like Guns N' Roses and Nirvana. He had the personality and the outgo and the stage presence of like an alternative David Lee Roth, if that makes sense. And it would have been interesting, I'm not a big Pearl Jam fan. I mean, they're talented, super talented band. I do like Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, and Nirvana. I don't know why. I just am not a big Pearl Jam fan. I like Mother Love Bone a lot more. And Andrew Wood definitely, I think, would have, from my personal taste, I think Mother Love Bone would have been more interesting. But I wonder if Mother Love Bone broke with the personality of Andrew Wood being like just so outgoing, would he have been more the face of the scene, even more than Kurt Cobain? I don't know. It's interesting. Because you have like, Lane Staley from Alice in Chains and Chris Cornell from Soundgarden at the time were kind of shy. And I guess Kurt Cobain was too. I don't know. Nirvana to me is very different from the Seattle bands. Nirvana's almost more like the Pixies, more influence from punk. Where frankly, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Mother Love Bone, they're not that different. Alice in Chains opened up for Van Halen in 1991 before Nirvana really broke. Everyone makes it sound like there's such a riff, and it is true. Everything did change. That Smells Like Teen Spirit did literally it was like a whole new thing. But a lot of that was marketing, and there definitely was something about not having the stage production and it being just about the music. I do think there's something real to that. But part of it was definitely marketing, and look, Guns N' Roses had huge success in their '92 album, but most of those other bands, the Poisons and Motley Crue's of the world definitely fell off because something new came in. But anyway, third pick, I'm gonna go with Mudhoney again, a band that I don't really listen to as much. This is also gonna be 1992. This one I'm going to listen to the record, but I believe I'm going to do the song Suck You Dry. This was on a major label. This was the band, if you ask anybody that was there, everyone thought this was the band that was going to be the first band to be all over MTV, all over radio from the Seattle scene. Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic said they thought Mudhoney was going to be the band that broke first commercially. And, it didn't really happen. Next up, the Melvins. Buzz from the Melvins, very good friend of Kurt Cobain's. They were actually on the last Nirvana tour in 93. Or I guess early 94, excuse me. But he was on the last tour, and he's talked about, he was telling Kurt, just leave. Just stop doing it. Give Courtney everything, get out of the marriage, go on a solo tour and make some money. And just get out of the marriage, get out of the band, stop, it is what it is. But, and I think Kurt Cobain, actually, their 93 album, Houdini, Kurt Cobain actually co-produced some of the songs. I'm going to do the song Honey Bucket, which I do think got some minor play on alternative radio and some minor play on MTV. But again, nowhere near the level of the Soundgardens and Nirvanas and Alice in Chains and Pearl Jams. But these were literally the heart of Seattle. Just like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and Mother Love Bone, who, that band became Pearl Jam, with a different lead singer. And Nirvana. You could see footage of Chris Cornell wearing a Nirvana Bleach shirt in 1989 on stage or on 120 Minutes. These bands really came from the same scene. Most of them were really friends. And it's interesting just hearing, you hear them telling stories about how they thought this band was going to be the band. And it ended up being Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam. I would say Soundgarden probably the one that really represented that Seattle thing. I just think Nirvana, most of these bands were more like that, and Nirvana was kind of more like the Pixies. But yeah, that's about it. So we got 1, 2, 3. That's 4. I wasn't sure who else to pick, so I'm gonna. This band was in the '80s, the late '80s. But obviously this whole scene led to, the explosion of grunge, for lack of a better term, which is pure 90s. So I'm actually going to put for song number 5, the song This Town from the band Green River. This was Andrew Wood's band before Mother Love Bone. I think there actually was some overlap. And you can definitely hear, they sound, not as different as what was going on in the 80s. I really do see what people mean when they say Andrew Wood would have been the bridge from that hair metal stuff to that Seattle early 90s scene. So you're getting 2 from Andrew Wood. I just think he deserves 2 spots out of the 5. Just super influential character. And I'll throw you a bonus jam from another band on this list, either from the Melvins or from Screaming Trees. I'm going to think about it for a minute. But yeah, bottom line, these are the big bands. Everyone thought these bands were going to be the one to break, the Seattle scene. And it just shows you never really know. You never really know. Nobody thought The Offspring was going to blow up commercially while being on an indie label. Like Green Day had signed to a major label. Now we're talking about the Cali skate punk 90 scene a couple years later. Nobody thought The Offspring was going to be a band that broke mainstream. There was a lot of people there that were like, you know what, this is really blowing up. There's bands signing to major labels. I bet a punk band is going to go mainstream. A lot of people were unhappy about that. Not just happy about it, because there was this whole thing about selling out. But for The Offspring to be the one that actually blew up commercially while still being on an independent label, nobody thought it was going to be them. Everyone thought it was going to probably be Rancid, who did have quite a bit of success, MTV and some radio play, but not as big as Green Day and The Offspring. So you just never know. You just never know what band's going to break from what scene. If you fast forward, 3 Tune Tuesday, I talked about the bands. I did the White Stripes, the Strokes, the Hives, all from different areas. But the Strokes, where they were from, there were like 8 or 9 bands in that scene. The Yeah Yeah Yeahs, who I picked as a bonus jam on Tuesday, were in that scene. And Interpol was in that scene. And a few other bands. I think TV on the Radio came from that scene. So a lot of these bands had a lot of indie success. But if you go back, they didn't think the Strokes were going to be the band to break the scene. Like, no, most of them did not think that at all. And it's, you just never know. I'm trying to think of other scenes where you're talking about like one area. With punk, it was like Southern California, Seattle, alternative rock, early 90s, that wave of like independent, throwback rock from the early 2000s with the Strokes, the White Stripes, bands like that. A lot that didn't make it as well, like there is in every scene. If you go back in time, there are bands that were playing the same time the Ramones and the Sex Pistols were, in New York City and in London. And, I wouldn't say that they got the huge commercial success that, Nirvana and them had. I'm not saying it like that. But I'm saying legendary status. The Ramones and the Pistols probably have the most legendary status, even though in a lot of ways they didn't get to enjoy their riches. And they kind of became bigger legends than any kind of commercial success. But the bottom line is there were other bands that were really good that, were not as well known. And same with like, the post-punk new wave scene, where bands like The Cure and Susie and the Banshees and all that stuff came. I'm sure in the electronic music scene where Prodigy and bands like that came from, there were probably like 5 other bands from the same scene who people were like, oh no, the Prodigy is not going to be the one to break it. They're not even as good as this other band. You never know. I mean, Nirvana was special, no doubt about it. But, sometimes you just never know. But I think these are important bands. If you're a fan of any of the main 4 that did break, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, you guys know it all. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed. Check it out. I'll also put Mad Season, which I think some of you guys might know it. It's Lane Staley with the guys from Pearl Jam, a.k.a. with the guys from Mother Love Bone. The album came out in 95, as a side project. Basically, that band, Andrew Wood was their lead singer in Mother Love Bone. Chris Cornell was their lead singer in whatchamacallit of the dog. Oh my God. Say hello to heaven, and I don't mind stealing bread from the mouth of decadence. Temple of the Dog, Temple of the Dog. So Mother Love Bone, that band, became Pearl Jam. So they were Mother Love Bone. Andrew Wood was their lead singer. They become Pearl Jam. Eddie Vedder becomes their singer. Before they became Pearl Jam, they did a one-album tribute to Andrew Wood under the name Temple of the Dog, with Chris Cornell being the lead singer. And then they did Mad Season with Lane Staley from Alice in Chains as the lead singer. They literally had everybody singing from all the major bands, plus Andrew Wood, who would have been super famous. There would have been no Pearl Jam if that had happened. Really, everyone except for Kurt Cobain sang with these same group of guys. It's pretty interesting. And unfortunately, years later, Chris Cornell and Lane Staley would both succumb to death the same way in the 21st century. Especially shocking for Chris Cornell because it was 2017. I mean, he was like 50 years old. It just didn't make a lot of sense, you know? And then Andrew Wood passed away very similarly, but due to a straight-up drug overdose. And, Eddie Vedder's still kicking. And, the music was good. It was very depressing, a lot of it, but it was good. And, a lot of music is real. A lot of artists really put their pain down on paper. I mean, listen to the song Fell on Black Days by Soundgarden from their 94 album, Super Unknown. And just listen to the pain, man. Some bands are phony and just, sing what they're paid to. But the real bands, they really put that artwork, out there. And some of it's, dark stuff. Anyway, not to go too deep on you. I love you guys. I might mix and match some of the songs, but I'll keep the core bands, what I said. And, I love you guys. Later.